Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next case, Barron versus Baltimore. You can see that we are continuing with the Maryland theme for cases early in the semester. So let's dive in a little bit into the historical context. Then I'm going to have you guys read the case, relatively short case. Then I'll have another video explaining how the opinion rationalizes a solution. So, what's going on? Well, one thing again, as with all cases, I want you to keep in mind as you're taking your notes and you're going back and rereading things after you've watched all the videos. Make sure to pay attention to who did what to whom to bring about the case. Make sure you can identify what the issue is. How does Chief Justice Marshall resolve this issue? That's what we would call the holding in the case. What did the court say? Why did the court say it, right? In order to answer that question, you need to identify what the rule was that gets applied so that you know that the answer is, yes or no, right? And when you're applying and making rules and making legal analysis, that's when you end up embracing theories of constitutional interpretation. So you're going to want to pay attention to those too. All right, so what's going on in this case? Well, one thing I think you need to keep in mind is that, Baltimore seems like a relatively small East Coast city today. That was not true earlier in American history. It was a booming, bustling port city of, very sort of similar importance to New York and, other cities that we now sort of consider bigger. And so because there was so much activity going through the port, the city itself was sort of bursting at the seams, and it was growing further and further north. And believe it or not, the old border of the city of Baltimore used to be North Avenue. Now we consider North Avenue sort of in the middle of the city. The city, grew, and they had to redraw the borders because so many people wanted to live in the city. So people moved sort of further and further north, even beyond North Avenue. And so as they're building these new neighborhoods further north, and of course, the further north in Baltimore you go further and further up a hill, right? All of Baltimore City sort of swoops down a hill towards the harbor from north to south. And so as you're building these new neighborhoods, the city is diverting some streams, and that leads to lots and lots of dirt being swept into the inner harbor as those streams head down towards it. Now, John Barron and his business partner, John Craig, they owned the deepest wharf in the inner harbor, and that was a huge selling point because if you own a wharf, you make money by charging ships to park in your wharf. And if you had a wharf in the deepest part of the harbor, you could accommodate the biggest ships. And the bigger the ship, the more money they pay in fees to park at your dock. Well, as the dirt swept down into the harbor, Barron's wharf wasn't so deep anymore. The less deep it becomes means less money. And they're not happy about this. The government's action undermined the value of their property. So here's a painting of the Inner Harbor from the mid 1800s. So just to give you a sense, this is Federal Hill. This is the American Visionary Art Museum. So that building is basically still standing today, which is kind of cool. You can see the Catholic Basilica off here. That's Mount Vernon, right? You can see that, this is all prime real estate today, but it's still kind of sort of being built up. And this is not like the Inner Harbor today is sort of, touristy and, walk and, buy an ice cream cone and stuff like that. Not back then. It was all business. Ships pulling in and out and docking and unloading their stuff and the stuff being stored in warehouses. This has been turned into that fancy hotel, the Pendry Hotel down over in Fells Point. And I think this building, well, I don't know for sure, but one of these buildings that used to store was a tobacco warehouse has been turned into some pretty cool looking condos, right? So this is, this is a pretty busy place. Now we can't really see Barron's Wharf from this picture because it's just too far east, but we can here, right? So this is Boston Street, which you take to get to that Target in Locust Point, right? This is sort of the heart of Fells, and you can kind of see. So like, what's cool is like this is obviously Google Maps, but they've sort of superimposed the Google Maps over like an old timey map, and so you can just barely read Barron Wharf, right? Okay, so Barron sues, right? Because his claim is that because uh, the government's action undermined the value of his property, the government owes him compensation. And he sues the city of Baltimore because they're the ones responsible for diverting the streams. They sued in state court. And he claims that the city's action violated the Maryland Constitution, but also the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Fifth Amendment's takings clause. He sued for $20,000. The trial court judge only allowed $4,500 to be recovered. He won his case in the trial court, but the city of Baltimore appealed and appealed to, well, at the time they were called Maryland's Court of Appeals. They've now changed the name, so it's the Maryland Supreme Court, the highest court in the state court system of Maryland. And that court ruled that actually Barron was entitled to nothing. And so from that point, Barron appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, here's the thing. The U.S. Supreme Court can't determine whether or not his rights were violated under the Maryland Constitution because the U.S. Supreme Court is not tasked with judging state laws or state constitutions. But the U.S. Supreme Court could find that his Fifth Amendment takings clause rights were violated, and therefore the city needed to reimburse him for infringing on his U.S. constitutional rights. So the issue, though, is whether federal courts have jurisdiction over a case in which a state violates a provision in the Bill of Rights. Can the U.S. Supreme Court, that is, even hear this case? Now, so here's the wording of the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. If your property ends up being devalued or taken by the government, you need to be compensated for it.